So on the one hand, we can bring our own benefit, bring benefit to ourselves. They talk about, fulfilling the purposes of oneself and others. So the wisdom wing is fulfilling your own purpose, and then the compassion wing is fulfilling the purpose of others. So maybe that happened. May that happen from our little talk here together today. Well, one thing we can say. I love this analogy. I never stop mentioning it. You must know, a bird needs two wings. And it really covers all the practices, all the stages of practice. But what's helpful is they each help each other. The wisdom wing is very specific. It's very specific techniques, very specific approach. The main purpose behind it is to ensure that we stop doing actions that will produce our future suffering. So we are the beneficiaries. We are the direct beneficiaries of that practice. It's very important to hear this. We don't get this, I think, in the modern culture. It almost sounds a bit selfish, but we're not thinking through very clearly. It's a bit like if you have to, if you want to help others with nutrition, it's really the same. If you want to help others with nutrition, it's sort of obvious you have to learn it yourself first. And you have to know take care of your own health and apply those rules to yourself. You can't sit there stuffing yourself with garbage food and getting sicker and sicker and then try to help others. It's a bit sort of demented. Well, it's exactly the same point here. So the direct beneficiaries of working on your mind, abiding by the laws of karma, living a disciplined life, controlling your mind, being your own therapist, you are the direct beneficiary. But it doesn't mean that others don't benefit. As Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, if you abide by the laws of karma and don't kill, for example, you're the direct beneficiary. You're sowing seeds in your mind that will produce you to have a happy future life, not to be sick, to have, not to be harmed by others. This is the logic of karma. But he says, don't worry, the rats and cockroaches will be so happy. They'll have a party because you're leaving them in peace. So they obviously are the beneficiaries as well. So it's only when you get to the compassion wing, when you could say you continue to work on your own mind, that never changes. But the beneficiary is others now. The beneficiary is others. So I always say this. I remember when I first heard when I first heard the teachings when I was 30 something, and I heard all about this bodhicitta. They lay it out, all these, what Buddha would say in the Mahayana path that we're capable of. And it sounded like science fiction. It sounded like a saint, You mean there are methods to become a saint? Who wants to become a saint? You don't go to courses at university, 5-year course to become a saint. It just sounds like you're born this way and you cross your fingers, But no, Buddha says we can all become. We've all got the potential. We've all got the potential to become a Buddha. So Bodhisattva is a person who's on the way to becoming a Buddha. So when I heard all these, the qualities of a Bodhisattva, it just sounded insane. It sounded way too high. I couldn't see how to get there. I couldn't see the relationship of where I am now and that. It seemed too impossible. But then I heard His Holiness saying that really helped my mind. I always quote this. He said, if you want to help others, of course, practice compassion. If you want to help yourself, practice compassion. So that really showed me that, every time you work on your own mind, you get less and less neurotic, less attached, less jealous, less depressed. You're the beneficiary, but guess what? You're moving yourself closer towards helping others. It's obvious. You're removing the barriers that ego has constructed that create self and other. You're lessening, you're breaking down those barriers. And equally, every time you reach out to another person, every time you think of another person, every time you're generous to one person, every time you're kind to one person, they're the direct beneficiary of that. But of course you benefit. You're chipping away at your own self-centeredness. So the emphasis in the wisdom wing is on the practices of which you are the direct beneficiary. The emphasis in the compassion wing is that others are the direct beneficiary, but each help the other. It's sort of obvious. When we can hear this, it's very helpful. It's really powerful. The compassion wing is what makes sense to most people. They kind of, oh yeah, I want to be a Buddhist, I want to be compassionate. But we don't get this first part, We often think of it as selfish. You mean I've got to think of my own benefit? We get embarrassed by that. But it's obvious. The same with anything. You've got to play tennis. You don't keep saying, oh, I'm playing tennis so I can help others. When you are good at tennis, then you'll help others with tennis. There's no question. So be happy to be good at tennis, to be happy to get the benefit. I'm just using that as the analogy. Be glad to be the beneficiary of living a life of, discipline and vows and working on your mind and being accountable and doing your purification every day. And be delighted at the progress you're making. Be delighted that you'll get benefit. Don't be guilty about it. Be so happy. Wow. Turning yourself into a marvelous person. We all want that, Then and automatically, before even you do any extra work, automatically it makes you a little bit closer to others, increases your empathy, because you're loosening, because you're breaking down these, automatically by working on yourself, you're breaking down these artificial barriers that we have constructed between so-called self and other. So you got to know where you're at. We've got to know where we're at. This is where the talk we had last week, I remember I discussed it, in the Romanian group, there was a really intense discussion at the end of the talk about a fellow, because of the pandemic, he moved back home, and there he is freaking out, talking about his mother. She's a maniac. She's this, she's an alcoholic. She's possessive. She's demented. Yeah, we go. Yeah, I can hear that. We know lots of people like that, including our mum, maybe. But this is the point about the compassion wing and the wisdom wing. All he could see was the problems in his mother. All he could see, of course, being a son or a daughter is pretty intense. All he could see was the problems, this maniac, this deluded person, manipulative, negative, blah, 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 Clearly, but I mean, this is the thing about compassion now. We discussed this before. There's not a single possibility in his mind he could have one iota of compassion for his mother. He didn't see suffering, he just saw a maniac. And this is what we are in the world. We don't have compassion for karmas. We don't have compassion for crazy people. All we do is see the harm they're doing. So that implies we haven't done enough work on our own mind, It's logical. It's like, you're overweight yourself and you're eating all the wrong food, and all you do is point fingers at everybody else who's overweight and eating the wrong food. Finding fault in everybody else. We love to find fault in everybody else. The more we find fault in somebody else, the more it shows we haven't done the work inside. The more work you do inside, the more kind you are when you see the world, This is really true. So this boy, I mean, there's no way he was going to have compassion, but he couldn't. It's too much for his mind to have compassion for his mother, because he hasn't done the inner work. You can't force compassion. You can't force it. So, so then he has to do the work on his own mind. And then the added component was, of course, there's another whole discussion. There's his poor old mum. You can imagine, there she is in a culture where she's just seen as garbage. I said, you're living in your mother's house. Well, it's my house, he said. Well, yeah, why is it his house? Because his father gave it to him. Bypass the poor old mum. Who's she? She's just a slave all her life, doing all the dishes and washing and having no rights and no say and no power. Of course you've been neurotic. My God. And the son gets the house and he's living in this house and he probably doesn't put a single penny into it, and she does all the work and he complains about her. So there's an extra piece there, You have no right. If you're living in your mother's house, who do you think you are to dare to criticize? And how about paying your way? How about doing the dishes? How about doing the shopping? How about sharing the role in this house? That's another whole dimension of something else. That's another whole extra layer. Anyway, just discussing things. So it's really a minefield. To work on our mind is a minefield. Our mind is a minefield. There's so much complicated stuff, That's why you can't get much further if you don't work on your own mind. That's the job. And that means recognizing your delusions, recognizing the shortcomings, but not in a negative way, not guilty. Oh, look at me, I'm so angry. Oh, look at me. Not like being addicted to finding your problems and then rejoicing, aren't I bad? I told you so. That's not seeing your mind. That's just being negative. Seeing your negative mind and then being positive, that's the job to do. But that's also hard because we love to be negative. The irony of ego is that we're negative. This is what's fascinating. The irony of ego is the more miserable you are, the more self-centered you are, the more your negativities are rampant. So then when we have guilt, we're just adding to the negativity. We think guilt is like a good quality. We think guilt is like being spiritual. No, it's not. It's just another negativity. So we've got to see our problems and then be delighted to see them and then know they don't define us and to begin to identify with our positive parts. That's the part that's hard. We usually get stuck in seeing the negative and then staying there. So we've got to see the negative inside us with a different attitude, with a kind attitude, with a soft attitude. Delight that we've seen the problem, now we can solve it. And that's tough because we don't tend to go that direction. We tend just to go, I'm a bad person. Look at me. You know, we love to find problems. We're addicted to problems. It sounds kind of cruel. But Lama Yeshe often would call ego the self-pity me. It sounds very hurtful to hear that because life is tough, you know. Seems mean to say it's self-pity. But this is the irony when we really study the Buddhist view about the characteristics of ego: attachment, anger, depression, low self-esteem. You know, they're by their nature, they're miserable. In their nature, they are utterly miserable. And they're very fixed and very concrete. And these are the views we have. And we can't, and this is the other one, this is the part we're discussing this, I think, yesterday somewhere. It's the most powerful level of practice we can, when we really can start, when we really get to this level of practice, where we can hear the unhappy thoughts, the attachment, the anger, the jealousy, the resentment, the panic, the fears, all that, the voices of ego. When we can hear what they're saying, and then know that they're exaggerations. They don't have any basis in reality. They're mistakes, they're misconceptions, they're liars. That's hard to see. What do you mean they're not true? Of course it's true I'm a creep. Of course it's true I can't change. Of course it's true that everything is bad. Of course it's true that everything is hopeless. What do you mean it's not true? Of course it's true. We say that. It's very hard when our minds are very fixed. One of the characteristics of ego grasping, the root delusion, is absolute concreteness. Absolute. This is this, and it's right. And nobody on earth will help us change our mind. That's the deepest suffering we all have. When we can begin to loosen the grip of that ego grasping and actually dare to consider that maybe the view of attachment that I've got, or maybe the view of hopelessness, or maybe the view of guilt or anger, just maybe it's an exaggeration. Maybe objectively it isn't like that. We can start to think that we're putting a chink, we're putting an atomic bomb under that concreteness. We're starting to have space in the mind, you know. That's the miracle of practice. But it's the absoluteness. That's the function of ego grasping. The absolute concrete. It's the fundamentalism. This is this. I am right, and it won't change. That's the nightmare of ego. It's how it is. It's hopeless. I'm no good. I can't change. That's it. It can't change. It won't change. That's it. And that's why we go crazy. That's why we go crazy, you know. So it's quite hard to do this. It's quite hard to practice. And we have to recognize that characteristic of all the delusions. They're so concrete, so fixed. I mean, we know it's true. When you're just in that moment when you're really angry with your mum, like that boy, you know. I know the boy. I've seen him on classes for ages. He's really kind. He's really working hard on his mind. But then, of course, he's got his mum and she's a red rag to a bull. We know that. So for him to consider that what he's seeing when he sees his mother, hears his mother talk, sees her behavior, that to think the possibility that his view of his mother, there's a different way of seeing her. That's when we find it impossible. Nothing in his mind could see anything different. We are all like that, aren't we? Just the way we are with politics, the way we are with the world. We have these very fixed views of things. It is like this. It is the way it is. And we don't, and one time His Holiness the Dalai Lama was asked, how do you apply this whole philosophy of emptiness, which seems so abstract to us, to daily life, in daily life? And his answer was so simple and so profound. And this is the essence of it all. He said, try to see things from another point of view. That's it. It seems almost like, what? What do you mean, see my mother from another point of view? What do you mean, see my life as from another point of view? It is hopeless. I am no good. It is a disaster. I can't change. It is no everything. What my beliefs are right now are absolute. That's how we think. To dare to think. We don't even hear it. We can't even hear it. See it. What do you mean, see it from another point of view? We can't even hear that. When we're in the complete throes of that anger, that anxiety, that jealousy, that whatever it might be, is not an atom of space, to see things differently. This is the key to success. It's very fascinating. As Lama Zopa says, bad enough that we're seeing the world through the lenses, that's my word, of attachment, anger, fears, whatever. Bad enough that we see the world in that way, or see myself in that way. Bad enough with that. But the killer is, and that's my word as well, the tragic thing is that we believe in it, that we believe it's true. And this is what's hard to hear. That boy, when he's in the midst of this anger and rage with his mother, just an example. Or you with your own story about yourself. To hear that it's a fixed, distorted, exaggerated view, we can't even hear the meaning of that. What do you mean it's not true? It is true, we will say. She is like that, we will say. I am like this, we will say. We can't even hear. It's a puzzle to us to hear, what do you mean it's not true? It's very fascinating. But another way to put it is this, when we understand impermanence, the good aspect of impermanence is that nothing's set in stone. This is already profound. This can lead us to emptiness. So it might be at this moment, like his mum, or his view of his mum, either way, they are that at the moment, but it can change. Just impermanence is a miracle. To begin to understand impermanence in the proper way, not in the way of thinking, oh my God, I'm going to die, then why bother? Have a panic attack. You're going to die, so I might as well just lie down and die myself now. No, that's not helpful. That's why I always say about that example I always give, one actor, when she was in love with the husband and everything and perfect, and since that time they've broken up. And she said, we will be, when everything was perfect, when everything's lovely and delicious, we will be together until we're 80, she said. With absolute certainty, she said that. That's because she's attached to the delicious things that are happening right now. And then two, because of that, we impose this permanent characteristic onto it because we can't stand the thought that it might change. So we will be together until we are 80. So then what happens when the husband left her? She'll crash down. She did, in fact, crash down to despair. And now this is the point. In the first place, when everything's delicious, you grasp onto it as permanent because you can't bear the thought that it will change. And then when it does change, now you crash down to despair. And now you hold on to that despair and hopelessness as being permanent. And it will never change. That's a typical way that we use the view of permanence. No, everything's a disaster. I am no good. I am bad. I am sick. I am crazy. This is a disaster. I am poor. I have no money. It is terrible, and it will never change. We believe that with certainty. We can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, So when you're in the up mode, you kind of calm your mind down. Well, things do change, but meanwhile, don't despair. Make the most every day. When everything is beautiful, you make the most of it. When things do change, which is natural, minute by minute, they're changing. then you get used to it. You go with the flow, you run with it, and then you know that that'll change too. So when we can even understand impermanence in the right way, it's profound, it can lift our mind, make us happy. But what we do sometimes when we hear about impermanence, we just use it as another weapon to make ourselves miserable. Oh, well, if it's all going to change, am I going to die? You're going to die. I might as well just lie back and die. No, that's nihilism. It's not like that. Just to see that the way ego, the attachment, anger, fear, they're very concrete. That's the key point. They're very fixed, very absolute. And then we believe in that picture that they have painted. We believe that picture's true. We try to, and then if it's a good picture, we try to sort of lock it away so it'll never change, and living in nightmare trying to sustain this thing. And then if it does change and goes down to despair, we then lock it away and believe now it's permanently terrible. So either way, we don't win, Nothing has an intrinsic nature. This is the teachings about emptiness, but even about impermanence. Nothing has an intrinsic nature. It can't have something with an intrinsic nature. Of course, this is too abstract for us. We can't understand this. But nothing has a concrete, nothing's set in stone. It's a good statement. Nothing's set in stone. That's very humble if we can see that. Yes, things might be bad now, but they can change. But when we've got this absolute view, we say things are bad now and it will never change. We can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, and we believe it absolutely. This is the tragedy. This is how we all are. This is Buddha's analysis. This is Buddha's analysis. And he didn't make all this up. He just observed it. We can see it's common sense. We can agree with Buddha, If you can prove he's wrong, then fine. Prove it he's wrong. So anyway, blah, blah, those usual things, And again, the bottom line, underneath all of this, the thing is the hardest thing to see is that what goes on in our mind, not the outside world, what goes on in our mind, not the outside world. What goes on in our mind is the main source of our happiness and suffering, not the outside world. That's secondary. This is the most shocking point, but this is the point that Buddha's making. And that's the biggest surprise to us. Because that boy is convinced his mother was the cause of his problems. Somebody else is convinced because this or that or whatever it might be out there is the source of my problem. Our mind is. When we can begin to see this, it's an absolute revelation. That's the hardest thing to see. Okay, people, ask me some questions, please. What's going on for people? Anything that's happening in your lives? Do you want to talk about?
Yes, anybody? Laura?
Yes.
You'd like to unmute?
Hello, darling.
Yes.
Hello, Laura.
Hi, thank you. I was wondering how you deal with a person like the boy.
Yeah, and his mum. Yeah.
Yeah, in particular with the boy.
Oh, sorry, what do you mean the boy? You mean how do you deal with the boy or the mother?
The boy.
You mean if you're the mother?
Or if you're a person who's close to the boy. Do you talk to them? How do you influence people to try and make them less?
Oh, I see. Yeah, no, I understand your point now. No, in other words, you see somebody else who's doing like this boy and you're his friend and you see him dumping it all on his mum. Well, yeah, I mean, this is the part that's hard, because I was talking to him and the thing that was first evident to me was when he described his mum. She's a very suffering person. She's really suffering. And I can imagine from her life, she's just been nobody all her life and she's never looked at her mind. And now she's an alcoholic and she's all possessive and neurotic. I mean, but the thing is, this is the point. The only reason I could see that she was suffering when he told me about her was because I have seen that in myself. And that's the thing I tried to say to him. He wasn't capable of having compassion for his mum because he hasn't yet really begun to see his own attachment, his own fears, his own anger, his own jealousy. That really is the point. You can't possibly have compassion for a person who is overtly harmful and neurotic, like his mum, she clearly was, until you have seen your own mind. And that's the wisdom wing. So in just the same way, if you were his friend, You would not be able to help him unless you had done some work yourself. Can you hear that point?
Yes.
That's the point. That's why he can't have. So for me, there was not real much benefit in trying to tell him to have compassion for his mum. He has to learn to know his own mind first. And that's why I said to him, you can't live like that. I mean, my advice to him was to get, first of all, for his mother's sake, how dare he have the arrogance to sit in his mother's house and then complain about her and pay no rent and do no shopping and no cleaning like all bloody boys, you know, so typical sons in some cultures, when they just sit back there and allow the mother to do everything. That was his mistake, first of all. And then second, if he's going to go crazy with his mum, you know, if you can't stand it, you should get out of there. So I recommended him he should get the hell out immediately and for his own sake, leave his mother's house so he can learn to grow up and start becoming an adult. Do you understand?
Yeah.
And that's how I mean, just say, you know, to say, oh, your mother's suffering. It's not, he's not capable of seeing that because he hasn't seen his own suffering. He hasn't seen his own mind. Do you see my point?
Yes. Yeah.
And that's where his self-centeredness and his arrogance was coming from. Well, it's my house, he said. He didn't do anything. I mean, she's kept the damn house for 50 years, like a slave, no doubt. And then the father gives the house to the boy, you know. So she's just she's part of the furniture. We can imagine her suffering. But he can't see all that. So then he has to look at his own mind. That's what. So the extent to which I can see someone else's suffering is, and that level of suffering, not just the suffering of being harmed. It's easy to have compassion for people who get harmed, the innocent victims. But to see people who are overtly harmful and self-centered, like that mum, if you can't see that as suffering, it's because you can't see your own suffering. That's an absolute truth, you know. In other words, if you've not studied nutrition, and you have not even noticed your own crazy health, how can you possibly help somebody else? Impossible. You know, that's the thing, the relationship between these two wings of the bird. I find it so powerful. Do you understand?
Yes. Yeah, I do.
Yeah. Thank you. That's good, Laura. Thank you so much. What else, people? And that's why we have to know where we're at. I mean, he clearly should not be in that house. She's red ragged to a bull. Don't be surprised that he kills her. Why do you think? I mean, I always keep quoting this point that 40% of all women who get murdered is the person in the same, usually the same bed, if not the same house. Children kill their fathers and mothers sometimes out of their own rage and despair because you're too close to each other. You can't see anything in yourself because you're full of this rage and despair and this strong karmic connection between children and parents. You know, it's like a nightmare. I mean, it should be the first sign for him should be, I better get out of here. This is not good for me. But of course, he can't see that because we're lazy and we have this hubris of expecting, and so I'm allowed to live here, you know, and he takes his mum for granted and all that thing. That's also why he's suffering, you know. So if we understood in our relationships, and we could see them starting to go bad and you start to freak out and you can't handle, the first thing is to leave it. But part of our problem in our culture is we think it's, you know, especially it's a relationship, a partner, let's say, oh, you're not supposed to leave each other. You're supposed to be together forever. That's ridiculous, you know. But to notice you can't handle a situation is already implies some self-awareness, you know. But when we're so caught up in our own misery, we can't see past our own nose. So we can't make any wise decisions. He just sits there with his fury and his anger, you know, not thinking what he should do. Doesn't know what to do because he's fixated on his mum being the problem. Got to do the work on our own mind, I'll tell you. What else, people? Any other questions? And seeing your own mind means, and it's rather brutal, it means identifying your main delusions. A delusion is the term that's used often for, you know, attachment, anger, jealousy, arrogance, low self-esteem, whatever you want to call it, all the unhappy states of mind. But it's painful for us to own them because we would rather blame somebody else. And often because the delusions are the most strong in our mind, they're too close. We can't see them, you know. But we need to identify our main delusions because that's the reason we suffer. When we can identify our main delusion, and it's usually either attachment, anger, pride, jealousy, maybe. These 3 or 4, you know, they're the main ones. They're the ones that, so when you see that delusion, this is the way you understand why you've suffered in your life, you know. But it's hard to see the ones that are very close. And then, of course, we can give labels to them but not be very accurate, you know. So you have to identify your mind. And of course, we've got 1,000 thoughts a second. And there are lots of positive states of mind in there. But when we're very negative and very obsessed, when we're very negative, we're only hearing our negative states. We don't even see the positive. And this is a tragedy, you know. This is the worst part. But to identify what is the source of my pain. Is it attachment? Is it aversion? Is it arrogance? And I think arrogance is a really interesting one. We would never like to admit to being arrogant. Angry, we're even prepared to admit. Arrogant, we don't like to think we're arrogant. It doesn't make sense to us. But in our culture, we love to admit to low self-esteem. And what's utterly fascinating about this is that low self-esteem is like the flip side of pride. If you didn't have arrogance, you could not possibly have low self-esteem. This is quite shocking. So let's look at this. The key function of all the delusions, all the unhappy states of mind, there are two. One is they're very disturbing, but the other one is they're delusional, meaning they're misconceptions deep in our bones that exaggerate certain aspects of the object. So arrogance, the object, is obviously self. Arrogance inflates, exaggerates our own importance. Now, we can see it in other people very easily. Oh, my God, he's so arrogant. That woman is incredible. She's so arrogant. Look at them. You know? We see it in other people. It's really hard to see it in ourselves. We would never like to think we're arrogant. Low self-esteem. So, but this is the point. This is the thing, you know. Let's just look at the virtues, the virtuous side. So let's say a person is very humble. That person, interestingly, would have self-confidence, because humble is a more spacious state of mind. It's virtuous, it's spacious, it's not concrete, and it's an ability to be more accurate in who you are. It's not the same. We confuse humility with low self-esteem. We confuse self-confidence with arrogance. But the key factor of all the delusions is they're not comfortable, they're very concrete, and they exaggerate. So clearly, arrogance or pride exaggerates certain aspects of the self. I mean, of course, it's not comfortable. None of the delusions are comfortable. It's a very uncomfortable feeling. So that look at another person who's arrogant. They're very fragile. So, you know, I always think you're like two people in the same room. Let's say they're both good at the same thing. And one has got arrogance and one hasn't. That means that other one's she's got humility. Humility is a virtue. Arrogance is a non-virtue. Arrogance is overinflated, it's ego-based, and it's uncomfortable. And it's distorted. Humility is a virtue. It's more reasonable. It's more in sync with dependent arising, and it's comfortable. So a person who's humble, let's say they're very good at something. They can be good at it, but they're humble, which means they're very relaxed in who they are. They're not overinflating their importance. And that means this person is very happy to meet someone else who's even better than they are. They're delighted. They're able to delight in it. But the arrogant person is really distressed, really nervous, can't bear the thought of meeting a person who might be better than them. Because what happens is they take it as a personal insult, and they get upset, and then they feel, oh, I'm nobody. They flip it over and they become, I am nobody. I am nothing. So if you constantly feel you are nothing, if you constantly feel you're hopeless, I'm nobody, I'm nothing, I can't do it, I'm so negative, that's seemingly low self-esteem. And it is that, but it's the flip side of pride. If you didn't have arrogance, if you didn't have pride, you couldn't possibly have low self-esteem. It's like deflated pride, you know. As soon as you insult that proud person, they're so injured, there's so much pain, you know. So we've all got arrogance. In the West, especially, arrogance is one of our main delusions. That's why we all have so much self-esteem. In other words, when you've got low self-esteem, it's almost, you have proud. So when, you know, it's almost like how dare all these people out there be better than me? How dare everybody be more happy and more wise and more this and more rich and everything else? It's like low self-esteem is also comes along with anger. How dare these people be so much better? In other words, you should be like that. We can't bear to see this quality in ourselves. We can't stand to admit this quality in ourselves. But if we've got low self-esteem, it's because we've got pride, arrogance. We overinflate our importance, and then we're offended and hurt and injured when other things happen. We get hurt and injured and offended very easily. We're very sensitive, very fragile. And the other thing is, arrogance comes hand in hand with anger. If you've got anger, you can't not have arrogance. And if you've got arrogance, you can't not have anger, They're like two cousins. They're like brothers. They're like sisters. I remember Atisha, this 11th century yogi. I forget which way he put it, but both would work. He said, the best patience is humility. But he might have said the best humility is patience, So what's patience? Because this is a dirty word for us. Like pride is a dirty word. Well, patience is a dirty word. Patience, we think of patience as passive aggression, But patience is a really brave, humble quality that's rooted in dependent arising, that is not rigid, that sees a problem and doesn't have a panic attack. Sees a problem and greets it. Okay, I can handle that. A second you greet a problem, already the problem's diminished. The second you see a problem and have a panic attack, that's when it's like Mount Everest, And that's why we have panic attacks second by second, because everything's like Mount Everest. Everything is insurmountable. Everything is a complete disaster because we're seeing it as set in stone and it's offensive and we just have a panic attack and a nightmare. This is why we suffer. This is not to criticize us. The trouble is we can't stand hearing this because it sounds like criticism. But it's seeing our faults. And if we can see our faults, we can see our suffering. We can see why we suffer. It's kindness to ourselves to see it, But seeing these delusions is really quite hard, quite difficult, Because we're too close to them. They're too instinctive. But these are why we suffer. And if we're trying to stop our own suffering, which is coming from compassion for ourselves, we should be delighted to see our delusions and then know that they're impermanent. They're not set in stone. They don't define me, and I can change. That's the humility that has to come, So we need this humility and patience with ourselves, I tell you, a kindness to ourselves, But arrogance and low self-esteem is so interesting how they're so connected. It's a bit shocking to hear it. Because like I said, none of us would like to admit to arrogance. Nobody. But it's exactly why there's so much self-loathing. This is why we have so much self-loathing. Because we flip it over and we now exaggerate our badness, That's the tragedy. And all the delusions are set in stone, They're concrete, fixed. There's no space. There's no interdependence. So anyway, what else? Any other questions, darlings? Any questions in the chat box, Mary or Anna?
No questions in the chat box, Venerable. I have a question or maybe an observation.
No, I'd like a question, Anna, not an observation.
Okay. As I am observing my behaviour more and more, I can see patterns of behaviour, and also more extremes of behaviour. So it's sometimes it's really.
I don't quite understand. So why don't you just ask the question? See if you can cut to the chase and state a question, which assumes all these points that you're saying. So just see if you can come to a question.
Okay.
And if there isn't a question, then let it be, Anna.
Yeah. So when you're in a state of extreme emotion, how do you manage that?
Well, sweetheart, are you meaning negative emotion or positive emotion?
Negative emotion.
But you mean like angry, for example, or jealous?
Yeah, angry, resentful.
So when you're seeing the emotion, what to do is what you're asking.
Yes.
I think you know the answer.
Well, yeah.
Well, first of all, the real answer is it's too late to ask, what should I do when I'm in the midst of the emotion? That's, you know this, but I'm stating it now. It's nothing. I mean, you have to do something, but we only ask the question when it's too late. That's like when the wheels are falling off. That's always my analogy. My God, my wheels are falling off. What will I do? But the trouble is, you're going 100 miles an hour on the motorway, and you suddenly notice the wheels are falling off. That's what we mean by emotion. In other words, you haven't paid enough attention to your mind to grab the thoughts before they vomited out your mouth. So that's the bigger answer, the bigger learning, Anna. That's why we have to first control our body and speech. That's junior school, entry level, grade 1 practice. Control the body and speech, which actually shows how advanced even that is. Because we don't notice, in other words, if we don't pay attention to even our behavior, then how can we pay attention to our mind? It's really quite difficult, you know. That's why we try to have vows and live in disciplined behavior and control the speech and control the body. And that's why maybe every morning you wake up, you make a powerful decision, knowing what you've got to see today, knowing whom you have to have contact with. You know, maybe you don't go around raping and shooting people too much, but, you know, it's the speech, isn't it? The speech pours out of our mouths. So you've got to make a vow to yourself. I'm going to watch my speech like a hawk. That's your decision in the morning. And then at the end of the day, when you do your 4 opponent powers, you regret the garbage speech and you make a vow again when I wake up in the morning. So don't be surprised. That will start bringing the change. Don't just sort of, oh, I hope I control my behavior today. No, be way more specific. Control the speech. 99% of our problems wouldn't happen, especially when we're volatile, if we can control our speech. You know, it's very, very profound, Anna.
Thank you very much.
Good, darling. What else, folks? Huh? Oh, yes.
Yes, me.
Oh,
What does it mean, purifications?
Okay, darling. Yeah, I understand. It's a practice we all do, especially Tibetan Buddhists. We have a practice. It's sort of a meditation you do at the end of the day, where you kind of take stock of the, you know, let's say you had a fight with your hubby today, or you kicked the dog. I mean, I'm talking simple things. You take stock of your day, and we call it the 4 R's. It's a really helpful little psychological process. So the first one is you regret the rubbish, you know, the things you've done that have maybe upset people or hurt people with your body and speech. But the reason you regret it is because you know how it's harming you first. So this regret is like compassion for yourself. You regret having done that and said this because, you know, because the view of karma in Buddhism is that everything you think and do and say, none of it goes astray. It kind of produces the person you become. So you own the rubbish. And then, of course, during this life, you can own the stuff that you've done in this life to harm others, whatever. And then the second step is, well, you know, then because if you're a Buddhist, the next step is reliance, they call it. And we visualize the Buddha above our head. We sort of turn to the Buddha as our doctor, if you like. He's not a creator. There's no view of creator in Buddhism. So you rely upon the Buddha and his teachings because you do the work. And the second step is now you have compassion for those you harmed. So maybe Anna badmouthed somebody. So she, first of all, has compassion for herself and regrets having done it because she doesn't want to continue this suffering. Then she has compassion for the person she harmed. And then the next step, we do a little meditation and visualization and a mantra to purify. And then the 4th step is you make decisions. Okay, I'm going to watch myself tomorrow like a hawk, and I won't do this again, or I won't do that again. That's a bare bones. It's a very simple little psychological process, really, of taking responsibility, owning it, regretting it, having compassion, meditating, and then imagining purifying, and then making a decision to change. Do you understand?
Yes. Okay.
Very simple way of putting it. And there are very formal ways of doing it in formal meditation. But it's a really very, I try to talk about it in a very simple way, it's sort of like you're being your own friend. You're taking stock of it, because we know we build up so much resentment, we build up so much guilt, and we never deal with it until one day it comes out in a horrible way. So we've got to sort of deal with it every day at the end of the day. You understand? And then you go to bed with a happy mind. It's a very helpful internal process of handling your own rubbish, regretting it, having compassion, meditating on it, purifying it, and then deciding to change. Do you understand?
Yeah.
Laura, good, darling.
Yeah.
We do it every evening in our centre. I don't know, where do you live, darling?
In Exeter, in the UK.
Oh, okay, because we do it every evening at 9 p.m. our time, but you're in bed by then.
Yeah.
But keep your eyes open. We might do it one day in the morning. You know, I might do it sometimes. You know, we have our morning meditations at 7 a.m. our time here. That's about 2 p.m. your time. We have a morning meditation every day, 2 p.m. your time. So when it's my turn next, maybe I'll do this practice in the mornings instead of always, we do it in the evenings usually. But when is my next time on that one? And I think starting in October, I do the morning meditation. So I might do that in October. So if you're still around, you can come to one of those. Anna can tell you about it because she's in Liverpool.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. Who else, darlings? Anybody else? Any other questions? Nothing?
Nothing in the chat, Venerable.
All right, darlings. I think the thing is when we can see the way we suffer, this is the Buddhist view of ego, and I say it's the irony of ego. When we suffer, it's because of these unhappy, concrete, fixed, set in stone states of mind that are full of panic and fear and drama and doom and gloom, you know? We know when we're really suffering like this, it's like life is unbearable because everything is a drama. But this is the way delusions function. So it's really hard work, hearing all these stories in our head, knowing that they're not set in stone, knowing it's just an opinion in our crazy mind, knowing it's an exaggeration. That's hard to see, like I said, because we don't believe it's an exaggeration. And then learning to sort of steady ourselves. This is why Lama Yeshe not joking when he says we have to learn to be our own psychologist, learn to be our own therapist, learning to have this skill to be in a kind, spacious, but firm way, able to talk ourselves through things and find the solutions internally. You know, okay, we need support. We need external people. We need external therapists, whether it's your best friend, whether it's your spiritual mentor. That's the theoretical idea. We need support. But in the end, we have to do the work, you know, and we have to have confidence that it's possible. So the key function of positive states of mind, intelligence, compassion, kindness, generosity, self-respect, self-confidence, is they're not set in stone. They're not rigid. They're not based in panic. They're spacious and optimistic. And when we cultivate them, they are the source of our own contentment. They are the source of our own happy feelings, you know, because we can see the anger, the attachment, the panic, the drama are the source of our misery, you know. This is the key point the Buddha makes. But it's, oh my goodness, it's the hardest job we'll ever do, but it's possible. It's doable, you know. Yes, Susie.
Thank you for the teachings.
Good.
I wanted to ask for a while about mother's instincts and how that relates or doesn't relate to Buddhism. You know, when they say trust your gut, mother's instincts, all that type of stuff that I heard before becoming a Buddhist. I'm just wondering if that...
I know, I hear what you're saying. Just sort of give me an example. Can you give me
Well, actually, I have an example that's not related to being a mother, but it's an energy, instinctive thing. Sometimes when I meet a person for the first time, and it doesn't feel like aversion and it doesn't feel like judgment, but energetically, I feel like I need to get out, or something feels wrong. And I don't know what that is, and I don't know whether it's my own nonsense projected onto this person, but I don't know whether to trust.
I understand, but in any case, I mean, I do understand, and I'll answer. But I'm interested that in any of those cases, would you then later do some research to see if you were correct?
Yeah. I think so, but in the past, it's usually been a clunky way around. I didn't trust that instinct, and then later I regret that. And I've just
listen. Okay, so listen. Okay, so when we're really advanced practitioners, Lama Yeshe talks about this in his Mahamudra book, which we're doing those on, you know, our Monday evenings for the New Zealand Centre. We just did that yesterday. So in there, Lama talks about how in the Buddhist view of the mind has this incredible potential when we've developed some kind of single pointed concentration in that amazing technique that's central to all the Buddhist techniques. It's called calm abiding, you know, this which comes from these Indians beforehand, this brilliant skill that enables us to steady the mind and go to more subtle levels of our mind. When we've really accomplished that, and we don't posit this in our modern world, then you develop what they call clairvoyance. And that in our world is really weird. It's like you've got this vision of being an Egyptian princess 42 lives ago, and it's like a flash, you know, that's just kind of hippie trippy stuff. But we have no view like this in our modern psychology. We don't trust it at all. But this absolutely fits with the Buddhist view that the mind has got this potential to be, as Lama Yeshe says, to see things super clearly, not fantasy, not nonsense, because the subtler mind, you see, has the potential to see more subtle phenomena, such as the past, the future, and the minds of others. So that's actual clairvoyance, when you've really got it. But now, every one of us, as he pointed out in our daily life, we've got some level of it, and it's called intuition. So it mightn't always be, if we're paranoid, I mean, if we've got a lot of anger and a lot of delusions, then people are seeing fantasies every second. That's not intuition, that's insanity. But if you're relatively in tune with your virtuous parts of your mind, because your virtuous parts of your mind are more spacious, your delusions are more rigid, more deluded, more nonsense. You can't have intuition based on delusions. But if your mind is more open and you're more virtuous, then you can get an intuition about a friend, as Lama Yeshe says, that maybe there's something happening to your friend back home. And you have no logical proof, but you know it's true. That's like, for me, the way of putting that is sort of, because we're beginning to become more virtuous, we're more in tune with a more sensitive part of our mind, which can actually sense something in someone else's mind. Nothing surprising. But you've got to be clear. You could be just paranoid or made, you know, that's why you have to know whether it's coming more from virtue or non-virtue. You've got to know your own mind well. Do you understand?
That's clear. Thank you.
Good. And we can cultivate it by cultivating virtue. That's the point. What else, people? Anything else? Any other points to make?
Nothing in the chat, Venerable.
Oh, there's Zalo. We're talking about Zalo and you and your mum. How are you with your mum, Zalo? We were talking about you. You just come, or you've been there the whole time?
Oh, I've been here the whole time.
Oh my God, I've been talking about Zalo and it's him. There he is. Did you learn something from that conversation, Zalo?
Yeah, I did learn a lot. I'm actually, every morning, when I say the things that you just said, I vow not to do this, I vow not to do that, I vow not to speak bad words to my mom.
Good. Are you trying to be kind to her?
Yeah, it's been good. Our relationship, it's really good now. I'm happy with it.
So you're trying to be open and kind and generous to your darling mum, and seeing why she suffers so badly, her crazy mind and everything. Sure, she's suffering, there's no question. But this is very good. I didn't even know he was there. There you go. So it shows how humble he is when he doesn't mind me talking about him. But it's a good example. I mean, we all understand, you know. So this is marvelous. He's learned from it. It's fantastic, Zalo. Well done. And you got to see, you realize the point, though, about working on your own mind first, don't you? To see your own delusions, your own arrogance, your own impatience, your own anger. And if you see more of yours, then you can see your mum, you know, then you can have more empathy, isn't it? So you've got to be careful. You've got to be skillful. You've got to, you know, not be fantasy about your mum because she's suffering. And if you know, she is like a red rag to a bull, like they say, you know, for you. So you've got to be cautious, but also you've got to be also, you know, the one of like, I mean, this is maybe that's what country are you in again?
I'm in Argentina.
Okay, maybe you Argentinians, I don't know what you South American boys are like, but you also, you know, think, you know, you own the bloody world, you typical men, and poor mum's a nobody. I mean, I can imagine. You understand what I'm saying there, Zalo? It's a bit of patience.
I mean, it's like that. It's like that here also.
Yes, of course it is. So that's a really another part. And of course, you know, your mum's dying for her darling Zalo to love her, isn't she? And of course, it's so painful for her. So you got to be careful because she has got lots of attachment, and she therefore, an attachment is what makes us manipulate people, Zalo. So you've got to be aware of that. So be firm and kind, but try to be patient and loving to your mum and keep distance. You don't have to be with her every minute, you know. Keep distance from her, but also pay some rent, maybe. You pay some rent now or not? You don't pay any rent. Give them some money, do the shopping, do the dishes.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes she doesn't even let me. I try and she says, no,
like, that's typical mother. That's typical mother. But you be firm with her. I want you to rest, mum. I will do the dishes. You got to give her confidence to know that it's okay. She doesn't have to do everything. Do you understand, darling?
Yeah, sure.
Good. Well done,
Thank
Zalo.
you very much.
Oh, I didn't know he was here. So there you go, Zalo. But we're all examples for each other. Everybody's story, people can relate, It's really so true.
I would like to ask a question now
Yes,
that
darling.
we are talking.
Yes, darling.
Sometimes when I sit at night and do the 4 opponent powers, I mean, usually I notice that these 7 little don'ts, I usually don't do it through the day. Like
Right,
sometimes I do some of them, but usually I don't.
That's right.
So then sometimes I get puzzled, like, what should I think? Like, what should I regret? I mean, like...
Then this is where, first, it's a good point, Zalo. So if you have confidence in the Buddhist approach, then there's just today, but in this life, you've done countless examples of those. And then you can imagine and deduce, if you have confidence in reincarnation, that you've done this in countless past lives. And all of those karmic seeds are in your mind. And you want to put atomic bombs under them before they ripen as your future suffering. So you first remember the ones today, then you think of some this life, and then you've done all of them in countless lives. So you regret all of them from the depth of your heart because you don't want them to ripen as you're suffering. So that completely makes sense, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Do you understand, darling? That's the attitude. That's the attitude.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you. Can I regret thoughts?
No, you must also that, because that's the last 3 of those 10, the 3 main delusions, this very strong fundamentalist anger, the attachment, and the ignorance. So you regret any of those, of course you must, all of that, because they cause you suffering. First the actions, but then the thoughts, of course, on your own habits, your own arrogance, your own attachment, your own jealousy, of course, absolutely. But the point about regret is you conclude it by saying, because I don't want the suffering. It's like compassion for yourself. You must remember that part. Do you understand?
Yep.
Absolutely, darling. Good. Well, it's a good note to finish on. An up note for Zalo. I'm so happy. You darling mum. Okay, sweethearts, time to go. 1 hour, gone like a dream, as usual. So we delight and we keep going and we never give up, working on our own mind, having kindness towards ourselves, seeing our delusions, knowing they're not set in stone, and knowing we can change, and having some optimism and never giving up. And then having compassion. Okay, precious ones. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, darling people, all of you. Okay, much love. Thank you.
Thank you, Venerable Robina.
Thank you, Venerable.
Thank you very much.